The executioner raised his sword. The crowd held its breath. For 40 years, one man had stood in the corner of this room, and for 40 years, he had not said a single word. To understand why the blade stopped, you must understand the 40 years before it. This is the story of Wei Lin, the silent advisor, and the emperor who almost destroyed himself by never listening. Wei Lin was born in a village with no name, far from power. His father was a rice farmer. His mother made medicine from roots. Neither could read, neither needed to. But Wei Lin was different. While other children shouted, he listened. While others fought, he saw what others missed, observing the world in a stillness no one could name. The village elder once asked, "You never speak, boy. Why?" Wei Lin answered, "Words are like arrows. Once released, they cannot return. I have not yet found a target worthy of mine." The elder smiled. The loudest voice in the room is rarely the wisest. Remember that when you stand before kings. Wei Lin was 12. He didn't understand. Not yet. War came when he was 17. The old dynasty was falling. A new emperor was rising. His parents died in the burning. His village ceased to exist. Wei Lin walked away with something harder than rage. He walked toward the capital, toward the war, toward the future emperor. He didn't know why. Only that silence was pulling him forward, leading him to the heart of the storm. He arrived during the siege. The rebel prince, Zhao, was winning. 24 years old. Brilliant, ruthless, hungry. Wei Lin slipped through the chaos. No one noticed him. That was his gift. He found work in the palace, serving food, cleaning blood from throne room floors, and always watching. Zhao crowned himself in fire and blood. The old advisors were executed. New ones filled their seats. Wei Lin rose quietly, from servant to scribe, to something no one could define. He attended every council meeting, wrote nothing down, said nothing, just stood, the mute, the emperor's shadow. The first crisis came in Zhao's third year, a rebellion in the south. Every advisor had a different answer. Every answer was a shout. Zhao slammed his fist on the throne. "Silence," he roared. The room fell quiet. All eyes on the emperor, except Wei Lin's. He was looking at the messenger, still bleeding, still catching his breath, still not finished speaking. But Zhao chose war. 10,000 men marched. The campaign lasted 8 months. 17,000 lives. The treasury was drained. The victory felt hollow. 3 months later, the truth emerged. The rebellion had been collapsing on its own. All for nothing. If anyone had let the messenger finish, if anyone had been quiet long enough to listen, 17,000 men died for a war that didn't need to happen. Wei Lin heard the truth that night in the infirmary. He sat with the messenger for 3 hours, said nothing, just listened. He learned more in that room than the entire council learned in 8 months of war. His silence was becoming a weapon. 15 years passed. Zhao became older, harder, darker. 15 years of plots. 15 years of advisors telling him what he wanted to hear. He trusted no one. He saw enemies in every shadow. The council shrank. Executions and fear cleared the room. But Wei Lin remained. Same corner, same silence. The others hated him. His silence made their noise feel hollow. It exposed their lack of truth. One night, Zhao summoned him alone. Every advisor has opinions, schemes. You have nothing? Why don't you speak? Wei Lin considered. I speak when the listener is ready, not when the speaker is eager. The storm came in the 20th year. Famine, drought, rivers dried. 30 million people were starving. The provinces began to fracture. The advisors panicked. Every solution made things worse. Zhao sat motionless. For the first time in 20 years, he looked lost. The dynasty he'd built in blood was crumbling. And then, the statue moved. Wei Lin stepped out of the shadows. Every eye fixed on him. He stopped before the throne, bowed once, then straightened. He opened his mouth to say the words he had saved for 20 years. Your Majesty, you are asking the wrong question. Not, how do we save the throne, but how do we save the people? The throne room went cold. Guards drew swords. Wei Lin didn't flinch. He had waited 2 decades for this moment of truth. Zhao walked toward him, close enough to strike. 20 years, Zhao whispered. You watched me make every mistake, saw every blind spot, and said nothing. Wei Lin's eyes were locked on his. You were not ready. A drowning man cannot be taught to swim. He must first stop flailing. Something broke in the emperor, the mask he'd worn since youth. Zhao looked at the man he had ignored for so long. "What do I do now?" Zhao asked. Wei Lin saw the boy behind a crown. He reached into his robe and pulled out a scroll. Old, worn, carried for 20 years. A plan for distribution. They need to be led. Inside was a plan for every grain reserve. Use your army to deliver food, not death. The advisors screamed impossible. But for the first time, Zhao wasn't listening to them. He was looking at his shadow. General Meng burst in. "Majesty, the eastern garrison has turned. They march on the capital. The rebellion had begun. 20,000 rebels. 3 days away." The palace panicked. Zhao stood calm. "Why do they march?" Zhao asked. Wei Lin stepped forward. "They march because their children are hungry. They march because no one listened. They march because they have nothing left to lose." Zhao stared at the horizon. "Open the granaries," Zhao ordered. "Send them to the army." 40 wagons of grain rolled toward the rebel camp, and with them, one silent advisor. The bridge had been built. They talked for 7 hours. Or rather, Bao talked, and Wei Lin listened. About the hunger, the death, the years of being ignored. Bao asked, "How do I know the emperor will keep his word?" Wei Lin thought, "You don't, but I can tell you what I've seen. A man can change, if he learns to listen." The rebellion ended without a battle. The grain was distributed. The eastern provinces were fed. The bridge built in silence held firm against the tide of war. 40 wagons became 1,000. Every grain reserve was opened. For the first time, the people saw the emperor's hand not as a fist, but as an offering. Bao became a governor. The same provinces he had once marched from in rage. He ruled with the memory of the rice bundle wrapped in silk. The nobles lost their stockpiles. The treasury emptied. The elite grumbled in their palaces, but the streets were no longer filled with the sound of starving children. The empire survived, not through strength, not through fear, but through stillness. The ability to pause and hear the truth before the sword was drawn. Emperor Zhao ruled for another 23 years. Differently, quietly. The fire in his eyes had been replaced by a steady, calm light. He met with farmers, listened to merchants. He heard what advisors wouldn't tell him. He discovered that the greatest secrets of the realm were spoken in whispers, not shouts. History called it the Great Transformation. Scholars wrote books about the peace, but none of them mentioned the name of the man who stood in the corner, Wei Lin. Wei Lin lived in the same small quarters for 40 years. The most powerful advisor in the empire, in the smallest room in the palace. He never asked for land or gold. Emperor Zhao died on a spring morning, peaceful, surrounded by the quiet he had learned to love. His son took the throne, a young man, full of energy and uncertainty. The young Zhao inherited everything: the empire, the treasury, the burden, and one silent advisor, now very old, still standing in the same corner. The new emperor had a question, the same one his father had asked decades before. "Why don't you speak?" Wei Lin smiled. The wrinkles mapped decades of watching. "Because your father learned to listen," Wei Lin whispered. "Now, it's your turn to learn." The cycle of silence and wisdom began anew. Wei Lin died at 87, in the same small room, with the same view of the mountains he had left as a boy. The entire palace mourned a man they barely knew. They mourned not for what he'd said, but for what he'd shown. That truth doesn't need to be loud. That power doesn't need to be cruel. They lit candles for the silence. The young emperor placed a stone at his grave. No name, no title, just 3 characters that defined a life and saved an empire. He listened. Here's what Wei Lin understood. From that village to his last breath, the loudest voice in the room is rarely the wisest. But the one who listens carries more than words, carries weight, carries truth, carries the moments that change everything. Wei Lin spoke perhaps 100 sentences in 40 years. Each one was earned. The other advisors spoke thousands. They won arguments. They commanded attention. And yet, history forgot them all. Their noise faded into the wind. Wei Lin's village was restored. It thrived. Some voices are loud and fill rooms, but other voices are quiet. They wait. They watch. And when they finally speak, they change empires. The strongest word is often silence. And the greatest power is knowing when to use it. Never be afraid of the quiet, for in the quiet, truth is born. The greatest power. What are you waiting to say? Or more importantly, what are you waiting to hear?